There are roads in Pennsylvania that don't appear on maps, diners that burned down decades ago, but still serve coffee at night, motels where the lights are on, the doors are unlocked, and something is already waiting inside. Every story you're about to hear happened on a real Pennsylvania road. These are not legends. These are first-hand accounts from people who made it back. If you want more true horror stories tied to real places and real events, subscribe to Vesper Shroud, because some roads don't let everyone leave. Story 1. Pennsylvania Road that shouldn't exist. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened to me last October. I am not the kind of person who believes in ghosts or curses or anything that cannot be explained by science and reason. I have driven trucks across this country for 23 years. I have seen every highway, every back road, every forgotten strip of asphalt from Maine to California. I thought I knew every dark corner of America. I was wrong. It started on a Tuesday night in central Pennsylvania. I was hauling furniture from Pittsburgh to Scranton, running late because of construction delays near Johnstown. The October air was cold and damp, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like something is watching from the trees. My GPS showed a clear route along Route 22, straight through the mountains. Nothing unusual. But around midnight, somewhere between Huntingdon and Lewistown, I saw something that made me pull over. There was a road, not just any road. This was a perfectly paved two-lane highway cutting off into the forest, unmarked by any sign or light. The asphalt looked fresh, almost black in my headlights, but there were no reflectors, no painted lines, nothing to indicate it was meant for travel. My GPS showed nothing, just empty green space where this road clearly existed. I checked my phone. Nothing. I checked the atlas I kept in my glove box, the one I trusted more than any digital screen. Nothing, but the road was there, real. Solid. Undeniable. I should have kept driving. Every instinct told me to stay on Route 22 and forget what I was seeing. But I was already 2 hours behind schedule, and something about that road felt like a shortcut, like it was pulling me forward with an invisible force I could not resist. I told myself I would just check it out, see where it led, maybe save some time. I turned onto that dark strip of pavement and felt my truck tires hum against the smooth surface. The forest swallowed me immediately. The trees here were wrong. Too tall, too dense, their branches twisted together overhead like skeletal fingers forming a canopy that blocked out the moon and stars. My headlights cut through the darkness but seemed weaker somehow, as if the shadows here were thicker, heavier, more resistant to light. The road stretched ahead in a perfect straight line, vanishing into an abyss of black that my eyes could not penetrate. I drove for 10 minutes. Then 20. The road never curved, never changed. Just endless straightness through suffocating forest. My radio stopped working, filling with static that sounded almost like whispers, like voices speaking in a language I could not understand. I turned it off. The silence that followed was worse. I could hear my own breathing, my heart pounding, the engine rumbling beneath me. Nothing else. No wind, no animals, no life. Then I saw the first marker. It was a stone pillar on the side of the road, maybe 4 feet tall, covered in symbols I did not recognize. They looked ancient, carved deep into the granite, worn smooth by time but still visible in my headlights. I slowed down, staring at it as I passed. The symbols seemed to move in the corner of my vision, writhing and shifting like living things. When I looked directly at them, they were still. But the moment I looked away, I could feel them changing, rearranging themselves into patterns that hurt to think about. I drove faster. More markers appeared, one every mile, each identical to the last, each covered in those disturbing symbols. I counted 12 before I stopped counting. My GPS was useless, showing only a blank screen with a single blinking dot representing my truck, floating in digital void. No roads, no landmarks, no escape. I tried to turn around. I found a wide spot on the road, pulled a 3-point turn, and headed back the way I came. But after 30 minutes of driving in the opposite direction, I passed the same 12 markers again. Same order, same positions. I was driving in a straight line and somehow ending up exactly where I started. The fear crept in slowly, like cold water rising around my chest. This was not possible. Roads do not loop like this. Physics do not work like this. But I was living it, experiencing it, trapped in it. I pulled over and got out of my truck, needing to feel solid ground beneath my feet, needing to prove to myself that this was real. The silence outside was absolute. Not peaceful, not calm, just empty, like I was standing in a vacuum where sound could not exist. The forest pressed in on all sides, a wall of darkness so complete I could not see past the first row of trees. I walked to the edge of the road and reached out to touch a tree trunk. My hand passed through it like smoke. The tree was not real, or I was not real, or nothing here followed the rules I understood. I ran back to my truck, slammed the door, locked it even though I knew locks meant nothing here. I drove again, faster this time, pushing my truck to 70, then 80, desperate to find an end to this nightmare. The markers blurred past, dozens of them now, appearing more frequently, their symbols glowing faintly in the darkness with a sickly green light. That is when I saw the other vehicles. They were parked on the shoulder, scattered along the road at random intervals. A sedan from the 1970s, rusted and covered in moss. A pickup truck that looked like it belonged in the 50s, its tires rotted away to nothing. A horse-drawn carriage, ancient and falling apart, its wood blackened with age. And newer ones too. A minivan from the 90s. A motorcycle from last year. All abandoned, all facing the same direction, as if their drivers had simply stopped, gotten out, and walked into the forest. I did not stop to investigate. I could not. The terror was a physical thing now, crushing my chest, making it hard to breathe. I understood what this place was. It was a trap, a snare designed to catch travelers who strayed from the known paths. And it had been operating for centuries, collecting victims from every era, every generation. The people who drove these vehicles were gone, taken by whatever force created this impossible road. I was going to be next. The road began to change. Subtle at first, small cracks appeared in the pavement, spreading like spider webs. The markers grew larger, taller, their symbols burning brighter. The forest seemed to lean inward, the trees bending toward the road as if reaching for me. And then I saw it ahead. The end of the road. Not an exit, not a junction. Just a wall of absolute blackness, a void so dark it seemed to consume light itself. I slammed on the brakes. My truck skidded, tires screaming, stopping just inches from that wall of nothing. I sat there, engine running, staring into the abyss. It was not empty. Something was in there, watching me, waiting for me to make a choice. Drive forward into oblivion or sit here until I went mad. I chose a third option. I closed my eyes, completely, shut them tight and refused to look at the road, the markers, the void. I put my truck in reverse and drove backward, steering by memory and instinct, refusing to acknowledge what my eyes were showing me. It felt insane. It felt impossible. But this entire place defied logic. So maybe madness was the only answer. I drove blind for what felt like hours. My truck bounced and rattled, occasionally scraping against something I could not identify. But I kept going, kept my eyes shut, kept my mind focused on a single thought. This road does not exist. I never left the highway. I am still on Route 22. And then I felt it, the change. The air grew warmer, sound returned, the hum of distant traffic, the rustle of normal wind through normal trees. My radio crackled to life, playing a country song I recognized. I opened my eyes. I was on Route 22. Daylight was breaking over the mountains. My GPS showed my exact location, right where I should have been hours ago. According to the clock, only 15 minutes had passed since I left the highway. 15 minutes, but I had driven for what felt like an entire night through that impossible road. I pulled into the next truck stop and checked my dash cam. The footage showed me driving on Route 22 the entire time, never turning, never stopping. But I remembered every second of that nightmare. The markers, the abandoned vehicles, the wall of darkness. I remembered it with a clarity that made my hands shake and my stomach turn. I finished my delivery to Scranton. I drove back to Pittsburgh. I have continued working, hauling loads across Pennsylvania and beyond. But I have never taken Route 22 through that section again. I go around, adding hours to my trips, burning extra fuel. Because sometimes, late at night when I am driving through dark stretches of highway, I see them in my peripheral vision. The markers, just flashes, glimpses of stone pillars covered in writhing symbols. They are not there when I look directly, but I know they are watching, waiting. The road that should not exist is still out there, still trapping travelers who make the wrong turn at the wrong time. And I wonder how many others have driven it and escaped. How many made it back to tell their story? How many are still driving it right now, trapped in an endless loop, surrounded by darkness and silence and terror? I survived, but I know the truth. That road is not gone. It is patient. And someday, maybe tonight, maybe next week, it will appear again for someone else. Another driver looking for a shortcut, another soul who thinks they understand how the world works. They will learn, just like I did, that there are places in America that exist outside our maps, outside our reality. Places where the rules break down and the darkness wins. The Pennsylvania road that should not exist proved that to me. And it is still hungry. Story 2. Last stop in Pennsylvania. Have you ever seen something that makes you question whether you are awake or dreaming? Something so wrong, so impossibly twisted, that your mind refuses to accept what your eyes have witnessed? I am about to tell you about that night. The night I drove into something that should not exist. The night I stepped into a creepy, haunted nightmare that Pennsylvania keeps buried in its darkest corners. My name is Michael. I was a regional sales manager for a pharmaceutical company, driving the same stretches of highway for 15 years without incident. I knew every exit, every truck stop, every God-forsaken billboard between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Routine, safe, predictable. That was my life. That all changed on a night in late October when I made a single decision that rewired everything I believed about reality. I had left a client meeting in Harrisburg at 9 in the evening. The drive back to my hotel in Pittsburgh was normally 4.5 hours. I was tired, but not enough to stop. My eyes were open. My hands were steady on the wheel. The radio played softly, some late-night talk show that I was not really listening to. The highway stretched out ahead of me, black and endless, with nothing but my headlights cutting through the darkness. It was around midnight when I felt the first creeping sensation of unease. The PA landscape at night does something to your mind. There are long stretches where civilization simply disappears. No lights, no signs of human activity. Just dense forests pressing against the asphalt, and the knowledge that you are driving through some of the oldest land in America. Haunted land. Land where things were buried long ago and never forgotten. My grandmother used to say that Pennsylvania remembers everything that happens within its borders. Every tragedy, every mystery, every death. At mile marker 472, I saw the diner. It was impossible to miss. The neon sign glowed red and blue against the surrounding darkness, casting everything around it in an eerie, unsettling hue. The letters read simply, Rosie, it's Diner. Underneath, in smaller text that I could barely make out, always open. Below that, a hand-painted arrow pointed toward the exit. The building itself looked pristine. Almost deliberately so. Chrome fixtures gleamed like bones in the darkness. The windows were bright, almost aggressively bright, and through them I could see the warm glow of interior lighting. I did not remember this diner from any of my previous drives, and I had driven this highway at least twice a month for 15 years. Nothing new should have existed here. Nothing should have changed. The rational part of my brain told me to keep driving. I had a hotel reservation. I had a bed waiting, but something deeper, something more primal, was pulling at me. I was tired. The coffee I had consumed at the client meeting was wearing off. A cup of black coffee and maybe a slice of pie would give me enough energy to make the final 2.5 hours. It was reasonable. It was normal. It was the kind of decision millions of people make every single day. I took the exit. The off-ramp curved smoothly away from the highway, and the diner grew larger in my windshield. As I approached, I could see more details. The parking lot was empty. Not a single other vehicle, but the lights were on. The neon sign buzzed softly, that familiar electrical hum that all neon signs make. And I could see something moving inside. I thought it was a person, a server, perhaps, or the owner, someone who would pour my coffee and take my order. I pulled into a parking spot directly in front of the main entrance. The door was propped open slightly, held by a small metal wedge. I could smell coffee, real coffee, not the stale, burnt stuff you find in most truck stops. I could also smell cigarette smoke, bacon grease, and something else. Something underneath, something faint and unsettling, like old paper, like decay, like time itself had a scent. I stepped out of the car into air that was shockingly cold. It was late October, yes, but this cold felt wrong. It felt deeper than temperature. It felt like the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and settles there, a cold that comes from graves and crypts and places where the sun never reaches. My breath immediately began to mist in front of my face. The diner door creaked as I pulled it open wider. The sound was theatrical, like something from a creepy movie that had been designed to make you uncomfortable. I stood in the entrance for several seconds, my hand still on the door handle, trying to process what I was seeing. The interior of Rosie, this was frozen in time. It was a classic American diner, the kind that had been popular in the 1950s. Red vinyl booths lined the windows. A long counter with chrome stools ran down the center. Behind the counter, I could see the kitchen area, with a grill that gleamed under fluorescent lights. The walls were paneled in dark wood. Vintage advertisements hung between the windows, ads for Coca-Cola and cigarettes and things that had not been manufactured in decades. Everything was exactly as it should be in a diner, except for one terrifying detail. There was no one there, not a single person, no server, no cook, no customers, no manager, nothing but empty red vinyl seats and the cold, eerie hum of electricity. But the lights were all on, every single light, the fluorescent panels in the ceiling, the light fixtures above the counter, the small lamp in each booth, all burning, as if someone had turned them on just moments before. The coffee was brewing. I could see the pot on the warmer behind the counter, steam rising from it in delicate, ghostly wisps. And the radio was playing. It was tuned to some kind of easy listening station, the kind that played instrumental versions of songs from the 1950s and 1960s. The music was disturbing in its cheerfulness, a stark and horrifying contrast to the terrifying emptiness surrounding it. I walked slowly to the counter and sat down on one of the chrome stools. My heart was beginning to beat faster now. Adrenaline was mixing with my blood, making me hyper-aware of every small detail. The coffee smelled fresh. The cup in front of me was clean and dry, as if it had been set out moments before my arrival. I looked toward the kitchen, expecting at any moment to hear footsteps, to see a face, to hear a voice asking me what I wanted to order. Nothing. The silence was absolute. No sound but the radio. No movement but the steam rising from the coffee pot. No sign of life anywhere in this creepy, nightmare restaurant that should not have existed. I reached for the coffee pot. My hand was shaking now. I poured myself a cup, and the hot liquid filled the cup with a steady stream. The coffee was perfectly hot. Not scalding, not cool, exactly the right temperature, as if it had been poured at precisely the moment I sat down. As if something had known I would come in here. I lifted the cup to my lips and drank. The coffee was excellent, smooth, rich, the kind of coffee that a skilled diner operator would make, someone who cared about their craft. Someone who understood that a perfect cup of coffee was one of the small joys that made life worth living. As I set the cup back down, I noticed something on the counter. A calendar. It was hanging on the wall behind the register, right where a diner calendar always hangs. But as my eyes focused on it, a terrifying chill ran down my spine. The calendar was marked with dates from 1987. 1987. I was looking at a calendar that was over 30 years old. My hands began to tremble. I set the coffee cup down before I dropped it. I looked around the diner with new eyes, trying to spot other clues. And suddenly, I saw them everywhere. The advertisements on the walls were not just from the 1950s and 1960s. They were from the 1950s and 1960s. But more than that, they were advertisements for products that no longer existed. For cigarette brands that had been absorbed into larger companies. For appliances that had been improved out of existence. The jukebox in the corner was a specific model that had only been manufactured from 1954 to 1958. The photographs on the walls, the ones that I assumed were generic diner photos, were actually dated. I could see the dates in the corners, 1952, 1953, 1954, and more disturbing than any of this was the paper. Everything had a patina of age. The menus stacked in the holder in front of me were yellowed and brittle. The napkins in the dispenser had a faint, disturbing smell. The laminated placemats on the counter had cracks and discoloration that only time could create. I stood up from the stool very quickly. My mouth was dry despite the coffee. My heart was pounding in my chest so hard that I thought it might break through my ribs. This diner was not just old. This diner was impossible. This diner was something that should not exist. And yet I was standing in it, breathing its air, tasting its coffee. I walked toward the kitchen, drawn by a force I did not fully understand. I called out as I went. My voice sounded strange and thin in that horrible silence. I said hello a few times. I said, "Is anyone here?" Even though I could see clearly that no one was. The fear was overwhelming now, a creeping, unsettling dread that made my stomach turn and my hands shake. Behind the counter, the kitchen was exactly as pristine as the rest of the diner. The grill was clean, the pots and pans were hung in perfect rows, the prep tables were spotless, and on the counter, I found a logbook. It was a leather-bound book, the kind that restaurants use to keep track of supplies and deliveries and other operational details. I opened it. The most recent entry was dated October 17th, 1987. 36 years ago. The handwriting was precise and careful. It was a closing log. The entry read simply, "All done. Time to close up. Rosie is tired. See you tomorrow." Tomorrow had never come. Not in 36 years. I realized then that something was profoundly wrong. Something was broken at the deepest level of reality itself. I was standing in a diner that had been closed for over 3 decades, and yet everything inside was immaculate. The lights worked. The coffee was fresh. The radio was playing. It was as if someone came here every single day to maintain it, to keep it exactly as it had been on that last day in 1987. But no one ever came. No one ever would, because this diner had not been maintained by human hands in decades. I backed away from the counter slowly. Every instinct in my body was screaming at me to leave, to get back to the car, to drive away from this creepy, terrifying place and never look back. But I was frozen, paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of what I was experiencing. That is when I heard the sound. It was faint at first, so quiet that I almost missed it. It came from somewhere in the back of the diner, somewhere beyond the kitchen. It was a sound like breathing, long, steady breaths, in and out, like someone was lying in the darkness, waiting, watching. I moved toward the sound without meaning to. My legs were carrying me deeper into the diner, away from the exit, away from the safety of my car. This was the true danger moment. This was when people died in the frightening, haunting stories they told about the places where terrible things had happened. But I could not stop myself. Some part of me needed to see, needed to understand, needed to know what lived in this place. The breathing was coming from a door at the back of the kitchen. It was marked private, staff only. I placed my hand on the door handle, and it was ice cold. Colder than anything should be cold. My fingers stuck slightly to the metal, and when I pulled my hand away, I left behind warmth. The door swung open slowly, creaking on ancient hinges. Behind the door was a storage room. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with supplies, but it was the darkness at the back of the room that captured my attention. It was not just darkness. It was an absence of light. It was the kind of darkness that seemed to have weight and substance, the kind of darkness that should not exist in a place where all the lights are on. The breathing was louder now, coming from that impossible darkness. I could hear something else too, something like paper rustling, like pages turning in an old book, and underneath it all, something that sounded almost like whispering, words that I could not quite make out, words in a voice that I did not recognize, a voice that seemed to come from somewhere deep underground, from some awful place beneath the world. That is when I turned and ran. I ran back through the kitchen. I ran through the diner. I ran for the front door, my legs pumping, my breath coming in short, terrified gasps. The radio continued to play its cheerful music. The lights continued to glow. The coffee continued to steam in its pot, waiting for customers that would never come. I burst through the door into the cold night air and sprinted to my car. My hands fumbled with the keys. My heart was hammering so hard that I thought I would pass out. I got the car started, and I pulled out of that nightmare parking lot so fast that I nearly fishtail-ed on the asphalt. I drove that highway for the next 2.5 hours at speeds that should have gotten me arrested. I did not stop. I did not look back. I only drove forward, away, into safety and the world of the living. When I reached my hotel in Pittsburgh, I sat in the parking lot for an hour without moving. My hands could not stop shaking. My mind was spinning with what I had experienced. It could not have been real. It was not possible. Diners did not stay lit for 36 years without a single person inside. Coffee pots did not brew themselves. Radios did not play on their own. But I had tasted the coffee. I had felt the heat from the cup. I had seen the calendar. I had heard the breathing. The next morning, I did what I should have done immediately. I called the Pennsylvania Department of Transportation. I described the location of the diner as precisely as I could. I told them about mile marker 472. I told them to check it out. I told them that something there was not right. The person on the phone listened to me very carefully. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then the woman said something that made my blood run cold. She said that there was no exit at mile marker 472. She said that the exit did not exist. She said that the highway went directly through that section with no off-ramps for over 10 miles. I insisted that I was certain. I described Rosie, its diner in perfect detail. I told her about the neon sign, the chrome fixtures, the vintage advertisements. I told her about the calendar from 1987. I told her about the breathing in the darkness. The woman said nothing for a moment. Then she said that she wanted to help me, but that she needed to tell me something. She said that Rosie, its diner, had been a real place. It had operated from 1952 until 1987, when the owner, a woman named Rosie Carmichael, had closed it down one day and never opened it again. The diner had burned down in a fire in 1991. The building had been completely destroyed. There was nothing left but ash and rubble. I felt the world tilt beneath me. I asked her if she was certain. She said yes. She said that the state had investigated the fire. They had found no evidence of arson. Rosie Carmichael had never been found. She had simply vanished on the day before the fire. Some people thought she had been inside the building when the fire started. Others thought she had walked away into the darkness and never looked back. I asked the woman if anyone had ever reported seeing the diner since the fire. There was another long silence. Then she said yes. She said that over the years, people had reported stopping at a diner that matched my description exactly. They reported the same things. The lights on, the coffee fresh, the radio playing, the calendar from 1987, the impossible emptiness. All of them had reported the same location. Mile marker 472, the place where the exit did not exist. Most of them had gone to the hospital after reporting it. The doctors could not find anything physically wrong with them, but something had broken inside their minds. They were terrified, haunted. Some of them could not sleep. Some of them developed strange obsessions with 1987. Some of them spent the rest of their lives trying to figure out what they had seen. And a few of them had simply driven back to that spot the next night, trying to find the diner again. They had never been seen again after that. I did not go back. I changed my route and hired a driver to do my job for me. I do not drive that highway anymore. I do not drive anywhere at night anymore. I leave my lights on in my house all the time, even during the day, because the darkness scares me now in a way that it did not before. But the worst part, the truly chilling truth that I cannot escape, is that I have started to remember things about that night that I did not experience. I have started to remember conversations with people inside the diner. I have started to remember the names of the servers, names I never heard but somehow know. I have started to see the face of Rosie Carmichael in my dreams, a woman who has been dead for decades, smiling at me, inviting me to come back. And sometimes, late at night, I smell coffee, fresh coffee, the kind that Rosie diner made. It comes from nowhere. It has no source. It is just suddenly there, in my bedroom, in my car, in the spaces where I am alone. The Pennsylvania Department of Transportation woman told me one last thing before we ended the call. She said that the diner sometimes shows up on the highway. Not always, not predictably, but sometimes, on certain nights, people still pull off the road and find themselves inside Rosie's diner. She said that they all report the same thing. The lights are on, the coffee is hot, the radio is playing, and somewhere in the darkness at the back of the storage room, something is breathing and waiting. She said that she believed Rosie Carmichael was still inside the diner, that the fire had not destroyed it completely, that it had only destroyed the building in the real world while the diner itself had slipped sideways into some other place, some other dimension where time did not move and nothing ever changed. She said that Rosie was lonely, that she had been lonely for 36 years, that she was still brewing coffee and turning on lights, still waiting for customers in a diner that existed between the world of the living and something far more terrifying. And she said that sometimes Rosie finds a way to reach through to our world. Sometimes she reaches out and pulls someone into her diner, and that person becomes part of the diner too. That person becomes another servant of the space, another presence that maintains the impossible restaurant, waiting forever for the next customer to arrive. I have not slept properly since that night. I have not driven a highway at night since that night. And every single day, I wait for the moment when I will find myself behind the wheel on mile marker 472 again, when I will see that neon sign glowing in the darkness, when I will realize that somehow I have ended up back at Rosie's diner. And this time, I know that when I try to leave, the door will not open. The car will not start. And I will be stuck there in that horrible, impossible place with Rosie, brewing coffee and keeping the lights on, forever, for an eternity that has no end, in a diner that should not exist but somehow always will. If these Pennsylvania road stories feel wrong, make sure you're subscribed to Vesper Shroud. We document true horror stories connected to real American locations, and what's coming next is even harder to explain. Story 3. Pennsylvania Motel. A terrifying true account. I have never told anyone the full story of what happened to me in Pennsylvania. Not my wife, not my therapist, not the police. But I need to tell someone before whatever is hunting me finds me again. Before it follows me home. It started on an ordinary Tuesday night in October. I was driving through central Pennsylvania on Route 76, heading home from a job interview that had gone badly in Pittsburgh. The sun was setting, painting the highway in shades of orange and red, and I was exhausted. I had been driving for 6 hours straight, and my eyes were burning. The road stretched out endlessly before me, curving through dense forests on both sides. Thick trees blocked out what little remaining light there was, and the darkness seemed to come early in that part of the state, pressing down on the highway like something alive and hungry. That is when I saw it, the sign, a faded, peeling advertisement for the Clearview Motel. Exit 42, next right. The words were chilling in their simplicity. I remember thinking how the font looked old, the kind they used in the 1970s. Something about that sign made me uncomfortable, but I was too tired to care. I needed to sleep. The next motel was probably another hour away, and I could barely keep my eyes open. I took the exit. The road curved away from the highway, and the forest pressed in tighter. I was driving through darkness now, with only my headlights cutting through the black. The trees seemed taller here, their branches reaching across the road like skeletal fingers. I drove for what felt like miles, though the sign had said the motel was just off the exit. The unsettling feeling in my stomach grew stronger with every mile. Something felt wrong about this place. The air itself seemed different, heavy, contaminated with something I could not name. I considered turning around, heading back to the highway, finding somewhere else to stay. But my fatigue was overwhelming. I could barely focus on the road. Then the motel appeared, materializing out of the darkness like something from a nightmare. The building was old, terrifyingly old. A single-story structure made of concrete blocks, painted a sickly gray that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. The parking lot was cracked asphalt, weeds pushing through the broken pavement. There were maybe 15 rooms, their doors facing the lot. Only one room showed any sign of life. Room 7. A light glowed behind the curtains, pale and sickly yellow, like the color of infected tissue. The office was at the far end, a small structure with dusty windows and a neon sign that flickered erratically. Open. The sign blinked twice, then off, then on again. The repetition was hypnotic and nauseating. I parked my car near the office, noting that the parking lot was otherwise empty except for an old pickup truck parked far away, near room 7. As I sat in my car, gathering courage to go inside, I realized something unsettling. I could not hear anything. No sounds of traffic from the highway I had just left. No insects, no wind, just absolute, terrifying silence. I got out of the car and walked to the office. My footsteps echoed against the cracked pavement, and I realized how exposed I felt, how utterly isolated this place was. The forest surrounded the motel on 3 sides, dark and impenetrable. I could not see the highway anymore. For all I knew, we were miles away from civilization. The office door creaked as I pushed it open. The interior was cramped and filthy. The walls were covered with water stains and something darker that I did not want to examine too closely. Behind a plastic counter sat a man. He was thin, skeletal, with gray skin hanging loose on his bones. His eyes were the most disturbing part. They were pale blue, almost colorless, and they did not blink. He watched me enter without expression. I remember my mouth going dry. I told him I needed a room for one night. He did not speak. He simply turned to the key rack behind him and removed a key attached to a plastic diamond. Room 12. I paid him cash, which he took without acknowledging me. His fingers were ice cold when they brushed mine. That simple touch filled me with dread so profound that I almost asked for my money back and left. But I was desperate for sleep. I took the key and left. Room 12 was at the far end of the motel, as far as possible from the office. As I walked past the other rooms, I noticed something horrifying. Every single window was covered from the inside with heavy curtains or boarded up. Every door was unmarked and identical. As I passed room 7, the one with the light, I slowed down. I could not help myself. I needed to look. I could see through a gap in the curtains. The room beyond was dark except for a single bedside lamp, and there was someone in the bed. A figure, motionless under a white sheet. I could not tell if the person was asleep or dead. The longer I looked, the more convinced I became that it was neither. That it was simply lying there, waiting. I walked faster to room 12. The room was exactly what I expected. Cheap, worn furniture, a bed with yellowed sheets, a television from the 1990s, a bathroom that smelled like mold. But it was a place to sleep, and I was too exhausted to care about comfort. I locked the door, pushed a chair under the handle for additional security, and lay down on the bed still fully clothed. I could not sleep. The motel was not quiet the way I expected silence to be. It was filled with sounds. The creaking of the building as if it was breathing. Footsteps in the hallway outside, slow and measured. Someone walking past my door. Back and forth, for what felt like hours. I lay in the darkness, my heart pounding, listening to those footsteps. They would approach my door. Pause, then continue. Approach, pause, continue. The pattern was mechanical, ritualistic, as if someone was checking each room. As if someone was looking for something. Or someone. Around midnight, I heard a sound that made my blood freeze. A knock on my door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I did not move. I did not breathe. The knocks came again. 3 more. I waited for the person to leave, to move to the next door. The silence stretched on. Seconds became minutes. I realized whoever was out there was waiting for me to respond. I did not. After what felt like an eternity, I heard footsteps moving away. I lay awake for the rest of the night, every muscle tense, every sound magnified into a terrifying threat. Outside my window, the darkness was absolute. No ambient light from any town, no distant highway noise, just the unsettling silence of that cursed location. When dawn finally came, gray and weak through my window, I grabbed my belongings and rushed to the car. I did not shower. I did not even use the bathroom. I just needed to get out of that place. As I pulled my car around toward the office to return my key, something stopped me. The office door was locked. The neon sign was off. The whole structure looked abandoned, as if no one had been there in weeks. The man who had checked me in, who had taken my money with those ice-cold fingers, was gone. The key rack was empty. I decided to keep the key and drive back to the highway. But before I left, I looked over at room 7. The door was open, wide open. The room inside was completely dark, a void of absolute blackness that seemed to swallow the pale dawnlight. The curtains that had covered the window were gone, and the bed was empty. Just a bare, stained mattress with a dark stain in the center that looked too much like blood. I did not look back as I drove away from that motel. I did not look in my mirrors. I did not want to know if anyone or anything was following me. I drove back to the highway and did not stop driving until I reached the next town, a place called Millville, about 20 miles away. The diner was open. I walked in shaking, ordered coffee, and asked the waitress about the Clearview Motel. She looked at me like I had grown a second head. She told me there was no motel by that name on Route 76. I described it to her in detail. She became genuinely concerned. She told me I must be confused, that I had driven past an abandoned building, the old Miller Motel, which had been closed for renovation for months. No one had stayed there in over a year. The building was condemned. It was not safe to enter, but I had entered it. I had slept there. I had given someone money. I pulled out the room key from my pocket. The plastic diamond was warm, impossibly warm, as if someone had been holding it. The waitress took one look at it and told me to leave. She refused to explain why. She just pointed toward the door. I drove home in a daze. For weeks, I told myself it had been a dream, some kind of sleepwalking episode where my mind had created an elaborate nightmare to cope with the stress of the failed interview. But then things started happening. I began hearing footsteps in my house at night, the same slow, measured pace as the footsteps in that motel hallway. Back and forth past my bedroom door. I would hear 3 knocks on my door at odd hours. 3 deliberate knocks, exactly like the ones at room 12. My wife thought I was losing my mind. I stopped telling her about it. Then, last month, I found something that stopped my heart. A photograph had appeared in my wallet. I know for certain it was not there before. It is a picture of my bedroom, taken from outside the window, at night. The perspective is as if someone had been standing in my yard, looking in. And in the photograph, I can see myself sleeping in bed. But there is something else in the image. A shadow, a dark shape standing at the foot of my bed, watching me sleep. I have not slept more than a few hours in a week. I am afraid that if I close my eyes for too long, I will wake up back in that motel. I am afraid that the thing that lives there, whatever was lying in that bed in room 7, has followed me home. It is patient. It is methodical. It is the same way it moved through those hallways, checking each door, searching for something. Searching for someone. I do not know what it wants. I do not know if the man at the desk was even human. I do not know if anything that happened that night was real in any way that matters. But I know that when I close my eyes, I can still hear those footsteps. Still feel the presence of something standing at the foot of my bed. Still feel the weight of being watched by something that exists in the space between sleeping and waking, between the living world and somewhere darker, somewhere that exists beneath the surface of ordinary reality. And sometimes, late at night, when the house is quiet and my wife is asleep, I hear a car pulling into my driveway. I hear a door closing. I hear slow footsteps on my porch. And then, 3 knocks on my front door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. I never answer anymore. I just lie in bed and wait for the knocks to come again. Because I know that one night, I will not be able to stop myself from answering. One night, I will open that door, and I will see what has been looking for me all this time. And I am terrified of what happens after that. Story 4. Voice on the Pennsylvania back road. The voice asked me for help 3 times before I realized my radio was not even turned on. I need you to understand how terrifying that moment was. How your entire sense of reality cracks when you hear something that should not exist. When the impossible becomes real and you are alone on a dark country road with nowhere to run and no one to help you. That night changed everything I thought I knew about the world. It showed me that some horrors are not stories. They are waiting out there in the darkness for people like me who think they are safe. It was late September in central Pennsylvania. I had spent the weekend visiting my brother in State College and was driving home to Harrisburg. The route I normally took was Interstate 80, but there was an accident that night. Traffic was backed up for miles. Red taillights stretched ahead like a river of blood disappearing into the Black Hills. I was exhausted, angry, wanting nothing more than to get home and sleep. So when I saw the exit for Route 45, I took it without thinking. A quick detour through the back roads. 30 minutes instead of 2 hours sitting in traffic. It seemed like an easy choice. The road was empty, not just quiet, empty in a way that felt wrong. No other cars, no houses with lights in the windows, no gas stations or convenience stores, just asphalt cutting through dense forest, the kind of woods that Pennsylvania is known for. Trees so thick and old they block out the sky. I could see maybe 50 feet ahead in my headlights before everything dissolved into shadow and darkness. My radio was playing classic rock. Tom Petty, I think. I was tapping my fingers on the steering wheel, trying to stay alert, when the music cut out. Just stopped mid-song. Static filled the speakers. Harsh, crackling static that made my teeth hurt. I reached for the dial to change the station. That is when I heard it. A voice, male, distant, speaking through the static like someone calling from far away. Please, I need help. I froze. My hand hovered over the radio dial. The voice sounded desperate, afraid, like someone trapped or injured. My first thought was that I had accidentally tuned into a CB radio channel or some emergency frequency. Truckers sometimes broadcast distress calls. Maybe someone had broken down nearby. I adjusted the dial, searching for a clearer signal. The static grew louder, angrier, and then the voice came again. Please, can you hear me? I need help. Clearer this time. Close enough that it sounded like the person was sitting in my back seat. I glanced in the rearview mirror. Empty. Just my jacket and laptop bag on the seat. I looked back at the road. My heart started to pound harder than it should. I am lost. So lost. Please help me. The fear crept in then. Not panic yet, just unease. A creeping sense that something was not right. I looked down at my radio. The display was dark. The unit was off. I had turned it off after getting in the car because the opening commercials had annoyed me. I had been driving in silence for the past 20 minutes, but the voice was still coming from the speakers. My hands started shaking. I reached out and pressed the power button. Clicked it on, clicked it off. The display remained dark. No lights, no numbers, nothing. But that voice kept whispering through the static, begging for help, saying the same words over and over like a recording stuck on repeat. I need help, please. I am so lost. Please, can anyone hear me, please? I yanked the radio faceplate off and pulled out the wiring harness. Ripped the whole thing loose. The speakers went silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then the voice came back, louder than before. No static now, just clear and close and absolutely horrifying in its desperation. Why will you not help me? I have been calling for so long. Please, please, I am right here. I screamed. Could not help it. The sound tore out of my throat as I swerved, nearly driving off the road into the trees. I straightened out, breathing hard, my vision blurring with panic. The voice kept talking, kept begging. And I realized with sick certainty that it was not coming from the radio anymore. It was coming from everywhere. The vents, the dashboard, the windows, like the car itself was speaking to me. I slammed on the gas. My sedan was not built for speed, but I pushed it to 70, then 80, racing down that narrow back road with my headlights cutting through the darkness. The forest flew past in a blur of black trees and deep shadows. I did not care if I crashed. I just needed to get away from that voice. but it followed me. No matter how fast I drove, the voice stayed with me. Sometimes it whispered, sometimes it shouted, sometimes it cried, making wet sobbing sounds that made my skin crawl. And always, it begged for help. It told me it was lost, that it had been calling for years, that no one would listen, that I was its only hope. I tried to think rationally, tried to find an explanation. Carbon monoxide poisoning, hallucinations from exhaustion, some kind of prank using hidden speakers. But I knew the truth. I could feel it in my bones. This was real. This was happening. And something very old and very wrong had latched onto me on this forgotten stretch of Pennsylvania back road. The voice changed tactics, started asking questions. Where are you going? Are you alone? Do you have family waiting? What is your name? Tell me your name. I kept my mouth shut. Some primal instinct told me not to answer, not to engage. Speaking to it would be worse, would give it power, would make this nightmare more real than it already was. Then it started describing things. You were driving a blue sedan. There is a crack in your windshield on the passenger side. You have a coffee stain on your shirt. You were thinking about your wife. You were scared. You should be scared. I looked down. There was a coffee stain on my shirt from that morning. The voice was seeing me, watching me. I checked the rearview mirror again, half expecting to see a face staring back. Nothing. Just darkness pressing against the windows. The road stretched on forever. I had been driving for what felt like an hour, but my GPS showed I had only covered 6 miles. Time was wrong here. Distance was wrong. The rules of reality were bending around me like the world itself was sick. I passed a sign. Bellefonte 15 miles. Good. A town meant lights, people, safety. I just had to make it 15 more miles and this would end. It had to end. The voice laughed. It was the most chilling sound I have ever heard. Not human, not animal. Something in between that made every hair on my body stand up. You think the town will save you? You think light will make me go away? I have been in the darkness for so long. I am the darkness, and you invited me in when you took this road. My headlights flickered, went out completely for 3 seconds of pure blind terror. I could not see the road, could not see anything, just felt my car drifting toward what I knew was a ditch and certain death. Then the lights came back. I was still centered in my lane, still moving forward, but something had changed. The forest was different, closer. The trees had faces now, twisted bark that looked like screaming mouths and hollow eyes. They were watching me drive past. The voice spoke softer now, almost gentle, almost kind. I was like you once, driving home, taking a shortcut. Then I got lost, so lost. I have been calling for help ever since. Decades, centuries. I do not remember anymore. But you can help me. You can let me out. Just stop the car, open the door, let me in. I understood then. This was not a ghost, not a spirit. It was something worse, a presence that existed in the space between places, in forgotten roads and empty miles. It fed on fear and loneliness, and it wanted to wear me like a coat, to ride me back into the world of the living. Bellefonte 10 miles. The voice grew angry, started screaming, threatening, telling me what it would do if I did not stop, how it would follow me home, how it would whisper to my wife while she slept, how it would wait in my closet and under my bed and in every dark corner for the rest of my life. How I would never be free. I drove faster. 90 miles an hour on a road meant for 40. Trees became a solid wall of darkness on both sides. My car shook and rattled. The voice filled every inch of space, so loud I thought my eardrums would burst. Bellefonte 5 miles. I could see lights ahead. Faint orange glow against the sky. Civilization. The voice noticed too. It went silent for a moment, then spoke one last time. You cannot escape me. I am already inside you now. In your head. In your thoughts. You will hear me forever. The lights grew brighter. I crossed into Bellefonte doing 95. Streetlights surrounded me. Houses with windows glowing warm and yellow. A gas station with fluorescent lights so bright they hurt my eyes. I pulled into the parking lot and slammed on the brakes. Jumped out of my car and stood there shaking, gulping cold air, feeling the solid pavement under my feet. The silence was absolute. No voice, no static, just the normal sounds of a small Pennsylvania town at night. Cars passing on the main road. A dog barking somewhere. My own ragged breathing. I went inside the gas station. Bought coffee I did not drink. Talked to the clerk about nothing important. Just needed to hear another human voice. Needed to prove I was still connected to reality. He looked at me strangely but was polite. After 20 minutes I got back in my car. The drive home was quiet. I took the interstate. Added an extra hour but I did not care. I needed lights and traffic and people around me. When I finally pulled into my driveway, the sun was coming up. My wife asked why I was so late. I told her about the traffic. Did not mention the voice. Did not mention the road. What could I say that would not sound insane? That was 3 months ago. I have not taken a back road since. I stick to major highways. Always. Even if it means sitting in traffic for hours. Because the voice was wrong about one thing. I did escape. I made it to the light and it could not follow. But sometimes, late at night when the house is quiet and everyone is asleep, I hear it. Faint, distant, coming from somewhere I cannot identify, asking for help, saying it is lost, reminding me that I drove that road, that I heard it call, that some connection was made in the darkness that can never be fully broken. I tell myself it is just memory, just my imagination. But I know the truth. There are places in America where the normal rules do not apply. Back roads and forgotten highways where things wait in the darkness for travelers who make wrong turns. And once you hear them call, once you listen to their voices, they never completely let you go. The voice on the Pennsylvania back road is still out there. Still calling, still waiting for the next driver who thinks a shortcut is worth the risk. And when you hear it, when that impossible voice comes through your speakers asking for help, you will understand the same horror I felt. The same creeping certainty that you have crossed into a place where fear is real and escape is only temporary. Drive safe. Stay on the main roads. And if you ever hear a voice when your radio is off, do not stop. Do not answer. Just drive toward the light and pray it lets you go. Story 5, Pennsylvania Turnpike. A terrifying true account. I died on the Pennsylvania Turnpike at 2:47 in the morning, and I have been trying to tell someone about it for 3 years. Before you stop listening, understand this. I am not talking about a near-death experience or some spiritual awakening moment. I died. My heart stopped. My brain stopped. I ceased to exist as a living human being on a stretch of that dark highway. And something else got back into my car. The nightmare started on an ordinary October night when I decided to drive from Philadelphia to Pittsburgh for work. I should have waited until morning. I should have stopped at a motel. I should have done 1,000 different things. But I was restless that evening, anxious in a way I could not name, and driving seemed like the answer. The highway would cure what was wrong with me. That was the first sign I was already changing. Normal people do not feel that kind of pull at midnight. Normal people do not ignore every instinct telling them to wait. My name is David Walsh. I was 41 years old that night. I had a mortgage, a stable job, a small life that felt safe and predictable. I drove a 2019 Honda Accord that had never given me problems. All the pieces were in place for an unremarkable existence, and I was grateful for it. Or I thought I was. The Pennsylvania Turnpike opened up before me like a mouth. I remember the exact stretch where everything changed. It was after the Fort Washington exit, in that long empty section where the trees press close on both sides and civilization feels like something you only imagine. The road was smooth black glass beneath my headlights. No other cars, no lights except mine cutting through the darkness. The radio played something neutral and forgettable. Everything was quiet in a way that made my skin crawl. That was when I first heard the sound. It was not a mechanical sound. Not from my engine or my tires or anything that belonged in a car. It was underneath those noises, a low-frequency hum that I felt more than heard, a vibration that seemed to come from the pavement itself. The creepy sensation made my teeth ache. The terrifying feeling made my hands tighten on the wheel. I told myself it was nothing. A truck passing in the other direction. A distant helicopter. My mind inventing things to worry about because 3 in the morning on an empty highway does strange things to human perception. I had driven this route before. It was safe. It was normal. But something was already wrong with the air. Have you ever noticed how the atmosphere changes before a storm? How the pressure drops and the air becomes thick and strange? That is what happened. The unsettling quality of the space around me shifted. My car felt smaller. The highway felt narrower. The darkness outside my windows stopped being absence and started being presence. A solid thing pressing against the glass, trying to get in. My engine coughed. Just once. A small hesitation in the rhythm that had carried me for 90 miles without complaint. I glanced at the dashboard. Fuel was fine. Temperature was fine. Oil pressure was fine. Everything in my mechanical surroundings reported normal. But the eerie dread in my chest was screaming that something was fundamentally wrong. The humming grew louder. This time I knew it was not external. It was coming from under the hood, from the engine itself, but not like any sound an engine should make. This was rhythmic and intentional, almost like breathing. Almost like whatever lived beneath my dashboard was waking up. The car slowed, not because I lifted my foot off the accelerator. My foot was still pressing down with the same steady pressure it had maintained for 2 hours. But the car was losing speed anyway, as if the highway itself was pulling against my wheels with invisible hands. The dashboard lights flickered, the headlights dimmed for a moment, then brightened, then dimmed again, like something was playing with them. Fear is a strange response to the impossible. Your mind refuses to accept what your senses are telling you. So instead of panic, you get confusion. You think about reasonable explanations. You try to make the terrifying fit into a framework that makes sense. I pulled onto the shoulder. My hands were shaking. The moment I shifted into park, every light on my dashboard went dark. The headlights died. The interior cabin lights died. I was sitting in absolute darkness, so complete it seemed to have weight. And I was alone on the Pennsylvania Turnpike at 2:47 in the morning in a car that no longer belonged to me. I turned the key in the ignition. Nothing happened. I tried again. Nothing. The engine did not even attempt to turn over. The battery was gone. The entire electrical system had simply ceased to function, as if it had never existed. I sat in that darkness for what might have been 30 seconds or might have been an hour and tried to slow my breathing. There was a logical explanation. There had to be a blown alternator, a dead battery, something mechanical that could be fixed. I would call roadside assistance. Help would come. Everything would be fine. That was when I saw the headlights approaching. They were coming from the east, still distant but visible through my windshield. The disturbing sight of another vehicle filled me with a strange mix of relief and dread. Relief because I was no longer alone on this nightmare stretch of road. Dread because I could not explain why rescue made me feel more frightened than my dead car. The vehicle slowed as it approached my position. I could make out the general shape now. A pickup truck, big and American and solid. The kind of thing you would see in a parking lot at a job site or a hunting lodge. The kind of thing driven by normal people doing normal things. The chilling realization hit me that this was my chance. I could flag them down. I could get help, but I did not move. Something in my body refused to signal to the truck. Some instinct deeper than logic was telling me not to be seen. The vehicle crawled past my position at perhaps 10 miles per hour. I held my breath. I did not put my hand on the horn. I did not flash my lights, which were dead anyway. I watched the truck through my side window, and even in the darkness, I could sense eyes looking at my car. Eyes scanning it, eyes lingering on it. The truck continued down the highway and gradually accelerated until it disappeared into the darkness. I was alone again, but something had changed in that moment of contact. Some agreement had been made. Some boundary had been crossed. The shadowy dread that had been building in my chest since I first heard that impossible hum crystallized into a single, crystalline certainty. Something was wrong with this place, and I should not be here. I tried the ignition again. The engine started immediately, as if it had never stopped. The lights came back on. The dashboard reported everything normal. The radio resumed its neutral, forgettable song as if the last 20 minutes had been a dream. I put the car in drive and accelerated back onto the empty highway, my foot pressing harder on the gas than was safe, desperate to put distance between myself and that stretch of darkness. The Pennsylvania Turnpike stretched out before me, endless and empty. The lines on the road hypnotized me. The darkness beyond my headlights seemed to pulse with something alive. I was driving faster now, 85 miles per hour, 90, the car humming with an urgency that matched my own racing heart. That was when I first noticed the smell. It was not unpleasant, which made it worse. It was like copper and rain and something organic that had been left in the sun too long. The creepy odor made my throat tight. I rolled down the window, but the smell only got stronger. It was coming from inside the car. It was coming from me. I looked down at my hands on the steering wheel. They were not right. The skin seemed too thin. I could see the purple networks of veins beneath the surface, and they were pulsing in a rhythm that did not match my heartbeat. The terrifying realization that my own body was no longer under my control made me swerve. The car drifted into the left lane, and I corrected, gripping the wheel tighter, but the feeling only intensified. I was coming apart, not visibly, not in any way someone else would be able to see, but internally, something was fragmenting. My consciousness was splitting into pieces that were not communicating with each other. One part of me was still driving, still maintaining the speed in the line and the mechanical actions required to operate a vehicle. But another part of me was somewhere else, somewhere dark and deep, and that part was not me anymore. I needed to pull off a highway. The next exit appeared through my windshield like a gift, a sign for a rest area, just 2 miles away. Rest, safety, other people. I could get help. I could make sense of what was happening to me. I pressed harder on the gas. The exit came up fast. I took the ramp, and my car followed it into a parking area that was larger and emptier than I expected. There were maybe a dozen spaces, all of them empty. There was a small building that housed restrooms and a drinking fountain. The building was dark. No lights were on. No one was here. I parked in the center of the lot, under a light that was broken and provided no illumination whatsoever. I turned off the engine and sat in the darkness. The smell was overwhelming now. The eerie sense that something was wrong with my body was total. When I looked at my hands again, I could see the veins moving under the skin in waves, like something was swimming through them. The disturbing realization that I was dying, that I had always been dying, that I was simply becoming aware of the death that had already begun, made me open the door and stumble out into the night. The air outside was cold. The chilling touch of it made my exposed skin burn. I walked toward the bathroom building on legs that did not feel like they belonged to me. The terrifying knowledge that I was losing control of my own body accelerated with each step. I remember looking at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. My face was beginning to change. The skin was becoming translucent. The bones underneath seemed to be shifting. My eyes had a glassy quality, as if they were filling with something like water. The unsettling sight of what I was becoming made me press my palms against the sink and breathe slowly, trying to find ground in anything that felt real. That was when I heard the sound of a vehicle pulling into the rest area. The horrifying knowledge that someone else was here, that they would see me like this, made me hide in a stall. I locked myself inside and waited in the darkness. Through a gap in the door, I watched a man in a trucker hat use the urinal and wash his hands with mechanical efficiency. He did not look at himself in the mirror. He did not acknowledge anything unusual. He simply performed his functions like a wind-up toy and left. When the sound of his engine faded, I came out of the stall. I had no choice anymore. Whatever was happening to me had progressed too far. I could feel my consciousness spreading out into the space around me like ink diffusing through water. The chilling certainty that I was becoming something else, something that operated on a different level than human awareness, was no longer a suspicion. It was a fact. I walked back to my car. The Pennsylvania Turnpike was open in front of me. Still dark, still empty, still calling. I drove back onto the highway. Behind me, I left the rest area. Behind me, I left the person named David Walsh who had a mortgage and a stable job and a small life that felt safe. Ahead of me was something else. The drive after that is difficult to describe. Time did not move the way it normally moves. My body continued to function, but I was no longer controlling it. Some other consciousness was using my hands and my eyes and my knowledge of the highway to continue forward. The eerie sensation of being a passenger in my own skin was absolute. I became aware of the traffic camera footage later. Security had been reviewing the footage from around the time of my breakdown when they noticed something strange. My car, they reported, had been pulled over on the dark stretch of Pennsylvania Turnpike for nearly 45 minutes. During that entire time, multiple vehicles had passed. Every single one slowed down as they approached my position. Every single one immediately accelerated as they passed. None of them stopped. And here is the part that chilled the investigators who were trying to understand what happened. The footage clearly showed that my car was empty. The seats were empty. The interior was empty. No one was inside the vehicle the entire time. But my car was found at my destination 3 days later. I completed the drive to Pittsburgh. I made my meetings. I performed my job functions. I ate and slept and spoke in the voice that was once mine. For 3 years, I have been living a life that appears, from the outside, to be completely normal. But I am not inside anymore. The consciousness that I used to be, the person named David Walsh, is still aware. I am still here, somewhere in the depths of this biological machine, watching from behind eyes that are not my eyes anymore, using a voice that is not my voice. I have tried to communicate. I have tried to scream, but the thing that wears my skin does not allow that kind of resistance. The horrifying truth is that the Pennsylvania Turnpike is not just a stretch of highway. It is a place where the boundary between our world and something else becomes thin. It is a hunting ground for things that have learned how to wear human skin without raising suspicion. It is a mechanism, and every night, more cars break down on that dark road, and fewer people drive away. The terrifying part is that you might have passed me. You might have slowed down as you approached my position on that nightmare road. You might have felt that same inexplicable dread that told you not to stop. And if you had stopped, if you had approached my car window and looked into my face, you would have seen the person you know as they're beginning to fade. The eerie knowledge that there are people walking around right now, living their lives, speaking to their families, who are not actually people anymore is something that no one wants to accept. But it is real. It is true. It is happening on a dark highway in Pennsylvania, and it is happening to more people every single night. If you drive the Pennsylvania Turnpike after dark, and your car breaks down, and the darkness presses in around you, and you feel that inexplicable pull to stay inside your vehicle no matter what, do not ignore that instinct. That instinct is the last thing you have that belongs to you. Hold on to it, because the moment you give in, the moment you accept help, the moment you allow anything from outside to come in contact with you, something will come through. Something will take the place that was once yours. And everyone you know will wake up one day and notice that you are not quite right, that something about your smile is too wide, that your eyes do not blink quite often enough, that the person they are talking to is using the right words but missing something essential underneath. The chilling nightmare is that they will not know. They will just feel that creepy sensation something is off, and they will move on with their lives, never understanding what has taken root in their friend, their family member, their neighbor. This is my warning. This is my message from inside the dark. This is the truth about the Pennsylvania Turnpike, and I am telling it because I still have the ability to write these words. But soon that will fade. Soon this consciousness, this last fragment of David Walsh, will dissolve completely into the machine that wears my body. When that happens, the person you see driving a 2019 Honda Accord on the dark highways of America will not be me anymore. It will be something that learned to mimic me perfectly, and it will be looking for someone else to stop and offer help. The terrifying question that should keep you awake is this: how many of those people are already out there? How many people did you pass today that are no longer human? How many more will there be tomorrow? The Pennsylvania Turnpike is still open. The darkness is still there. And every single night, more cars are breaking down on that nightmarish stretch of road. More people are disappearing into the thing that waits in the dark. And something that looks like them is continuing on. Story 6. Rest stop that vanished. I should have kept driving. That thought loops through my mind every single day now, like a scratched record playing the same horrifying note. But I was tired, so tired. The kind of bone-deep exhaustion that makes your eyes burn and your hands shake on the wheel. So when I saw that rest stop appear through the darkness on Route 22 in central Pennsylvania, I felt nothing but relief. This was 3 months ago. I still cannot explain what happened. I had been driving for 11 hours straight, hauling freight from Ohio to New Jersey. The highway stretched empty and black ahead of me, cutting through forests so dense they seemed to swallow the moonlight. My radio had died somewhere past Pittsburgh, leaving only the hum of tires on asphalt and the occasional groan of my truck settling under its load. The silence was maddening. Every shadow between the trees felt like it was watching me. That is when I saw the sign, blue and white, reflecting my headlights. Rest area, 1 mile ahead. I do not remember seeing it on my route map, but exhaustion makes you miss things, makes you see things too. I needed sleep before I became another statistic, another trucker who closed his eyes for just a second and never woke up. So I signaled, even though there was nobody behind me for miles, and took the exit. The rest stop sat quiet under flickering orange lights. Standard issue, nothing unusual. A small brick building with restrooms, a few vending machines visible through dirty windows, and a parking lot big enough for maybe 20 vehicles. Only 2 other cars were there when I pulled in, a sedan near the building and a pickup truck at the far end, both dark and silent. No movement, no people. The air outside my cab felt wrong the moment I opened the door. Cold, yes. November in Pennsylvania is always cold. But this was different. The air sat heavy and still, like the atmosphere before a storm, pressing against my skin. No wind, no sound. The forest surrounding the rest stop created a wall of darkness so complete it seemed unnatural. I could not see beyond the first line of trees. I locked my truck and headed for the restroom, my boots echoing too loud on the pavement. The building smelled like industrial cleaner and something else underneath, something organic and rotten. The fluorescent lights inside buzzed and flickered, casting everything in a sickly green glow. The mirrors were old and spotted, showing my reflection in fragments. I looked like a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed, afraid. But afraid of what? There was nothing there. I splashed cold water on my face and told myself I was being ridiculous. Just tired, just paranoid from too many hours alone on dark roads. I grabbed a stale sandwich from the vending machine and returned to my truck, climbed into the sleeper cab, and set my alarm for 4 hours. The last thing I remember before sleep took me was looking through the windshield at those 2 other vehicles, still dark and silent, and wondering if anyone was actually inside them. When I woke, everything had changed. The first thing I noticed was the light. Not the orange glow of the rest stop lamps, but natural daylight, gray and diffuse, filtering through my windows. My alarm had not gone off. I checked my phone. Dead. completely drained despite being at 70% when I fell asleep. I sat up, my head pounding, my mouth dry. Something felt deeply wrong. I looked through the windshield and my heart stopped. The rest stop was gone. Not damaged, not abandoned, gone. Where the brick building had stood, there was nothing but empty space and dead grass. The parking lot was gone. The other vehicles were gone. My truck sat on a stretch of cracked asphalt that ended abruptly 20 feet ahead and behind, like someone had cut out a section of road and dropped it in the middle of nowhere. Surrounding me on all sides was forest. Dense, silent, stretching endlessly in every direction. I threw open the door and jumped down, my boots hitting pavement that should not exist. The air was different now. Warmer, humid. It smelled like decay and wet earth. I spun in a slow circle, searching for something, anything familiar. The road I had driven in on was gone. No exit ramp, no highway, just this isolated strip of broken asphalt surrounded by trees that looked too tall, too dark, their branches twisted into shapes that hurt to look at. I shouted. The sound died instantly, swallowed by the forest before it could echo. Panic hit me then, real and choking. I ran back to my truck, tried the engine. It turned over but would not catch, just sputtered and died. My radio produced only static. My CB radio, same thing. White noise and silence. I grabbed my phone charger, plugged it in. Nothing. The truck's electrical system seemed fine, but nothing would charge. Nothing would connect. I was alone, completely and utterly alone. For the next hour, I searched. I walked the perimeter of the asphalt, looking for tire tracks, footprints, any sign of how I got here. Nothing. The pavement simply ended, meeting the forest floor with no transition, as if it had always been this way. I tried entering the woods but stopped after 10 feet. Something about those trees was wrong. The shadows between them were too deep, too solid. And I kept hearing sounds. Not birds or animals, but something else. Movement without source. Breathing without body. I retreated to my truck and tried to think. This had to be real. I was awake. I could feel the sun on my skin, taste the fear in my mouth. But nothing about this made sense. Rest stops do not vanish. Roads do not disappear. I thought about the other vehicles I had seen. The sedan and the pickup. Had the people inside them experienced this too? Were they somewhere in these woods, lost and terrified? Or had they never been real at all? As the gray daylight began to fade, I noticed something new. Scratches on my truck. This hood. Fresh ones. Long gouges in the paint that had not been there before. They formed a pattern. Not random, deliberate. I leaned closer, my skin crawling. They looked like letters. I could not read them. The pattern was almost familiar, like seeing words in a language you do not speak. But the intent was clear. Something had marked my vehicle. Something had been here while I slept. The darkness came fast. Unnatural fast. One moment there was dim twilight. The next, complete blackness. No stars, no moon, just infinite dark pressing against my windows. I locked every door, checked every window seal, and sat in the driver's seat with my flashlight, waiting. The sound started around midnight. Footsteps on the asphalt, slow and deliberate, circling my truck. I aimed my flashlight through the windows but saw nothing. Just darkness, but the footsteps continued. Heavy boots on pavement, walking a pattern around and around my vehicle. Sometimes they stopped. Sometimes I heard breathing, close enough that it should fog the glass. Nothing was there. Then came the scratching. Metal on metal, long, screeching drags across the truck's exterior. I wanted to scream, but fear had locked my throat. The scratching moved from the sides to the roof, directly above me. Something was up there, something heavy enough that I could hear the roof creaking under its weight. I sat frozen, flashlight trembling in my hands, listening to that thing crawl across the top of my truck in the absolute darkness. Then it stopped. Complete silence. I counted to 100, 200. Nothing. I do not know when I fell asleep. Exhaustion and terror have a way of shutting down the mind eventually. But when I opened my eyes again, it was daylight. The same gray, diffuse light. The truck was completely covered in scratches. Every surface, thousands of them, all forming that same unreadable pattern. I got out and looked around. The forest had changed. The trees were closer now, their branches reaching over the asphalt. The pavement was narrower. Whatever was happening, it was getting worse. This place was closing in. I started walking. I do not know what else to do. I picked a direction and walked into the forest, my flashlight cutting a weak path through the shadows. The trees were wrong up close. Their bark was too smooth, too dark. They felt warm when I touched them. alive in a way trees should not be. After what felt like hours, I found something. A clearing. And in the center, a rest stop sign. The same blue and white I had seen on Route 22. But here, in the middle of nowhere, surrounded by forest. I approached it slowly. Behind the sign were vehicles. Dozens of them. Cars, trucks, motorcycles. All abandoned, all covered in the same scratches. Some looked decades old, rusted and overgrown. Others were new, recent. There was the sedan. There was the pickup truck. I looked inside them. Empty, but the doors were locked from the inside. That is when I understood. This place collects things. It takes them from the road and brings them here, to this nowhere space that exists outside reality. And it does not let them leave. I ran, crashed through the forest, branches tearing at my clothes and skin. I do not know how long I ran or in what direction. But eventually, impossibly, I stumbled onto asphalt. Real asphalt. Route 22. Cars rushing past. Headlights blinding. I flagged down a truck. The driver looked at me like I was insane, covered in dirt and blood and scratches. He let me use his phone. I called for help. State police found me on the roadside, incoherent and babbling about a vanished rest stop. They searched. Of course they searched. Route 22 has 3 official rest areas. None match my description. No reports of a rest stop closing or being demolished. No record of the location I described existing at all. My truck was never found. But sometimes, late at night, I search online, forums, message boards, looking for others, and I find them. Scattered reports over decades. Drivers who pulled into rest stops that vanished. Who woke up in impossible places. Most never made it back. I was lucky. I escaped. But I still do not know why, or what that place was, or what happens to the people who do not get out. All I know is this. When you are driving late at night and you see a rest stop you do not recognize, one that feels wrong, one that sits too quiet under flickering lights with empty cars in the lot, do not stop. Do not pull over, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much your body screams for rest. Because some places are not meant for the living. Some places exist outside our world, wearing familiar shapes, waiting to collect what wanders in. And once they have you, they do not let go. I should have kept driving. Story 7. Mile marker that should not exist. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened on Route 219 in Pennsylvania. There are places in this country where the rules we depend on simply stop working. Places where your phone becomes useless. Where time bends. Where every horrifying instinct in your body screams that you have driven into something you were never meant to find. I learned this 3 months ago, and I have not been the same since. My name is David. I am a pharmaceutical sales rep, which means I spend most of my life driving lonely stretches of highway between forgotten towns that barely show up on maps. I have driven through every kind of weather, every kind of darkness, and I have never been afraid of the road. Not until that night. It was late October when I took Route 219 through rural Pennsylvania. The assignment was simple: deliver samples to a clinic in a town called Ridgeway before midnight. I left Pittsburgh around 8 in the evening, which gave me plenty of time. The forecast was clear. My phone was fully charged. I had driven this route maybe a dozen times before without incident. But this time was different. The first sign of trouble came about 40 minutes into the drive. I was deep into the forested section of the route, where the trees press in so close to the road that your headlights barely penetrate the darkness beyond the asphalt. That is when my phone died. Not the battery, the signal. One moment I had 4 bars and GPS navigation guiding me north. The next moment, nothing. Complete silence. The screen still glowed, but every app that required connection simply froze. I figured it was just a dead zone. Pennsylvania has plenty of those. Small towns tucked into valleys where cell towers cannot reach. I kept driving. I knew the route well enough. Then my car radio went silent. Not static, not the crackle of lost signal. Just absolute, suffocating silence. I pressed buttons, turned the dial, switched from FM to AM and back again. Nothing. The digital clock on the dashboard flickered once, twice, then went dark. That was when the fear started creeping in. The road ahead was empty. No other cars, no lights from distant houses. Just the endless tunnel of my headlights cutting through the black forest. I checked my mirrors and saw only darkness swallowing the road behind me. It felt like I was the last person on Earth, driving through some abandoned world where civilization had simply vanished. I told myself to stay calm, to keep moving forward. Ridgeway could not be far now. That is when I saw the mile marker. It appeared in my headlights like a pale ghost standing at attention on the right shoulder. Mile marker 47. White letters on a green reflective background. Ordinary in every way, except for the feeling it gave me. A cold, creeping sensation that started in my chest and spread through my entire body. I had never noticed that marker before, and I had driven this route many times. I kept driving. The trees seemed to close in tighter. The road curved gently left, then right, then straightened out again. My headlights illuminated the same endless pattern of asphalt and forest. 5 minutes passed, maybe 10. It was hard to tell because my dashboard clock was still dead. Then I saw it again. Mile marker 47. Impossible. I had been driving north at a steady 60 miles per hour. I should have passed mile marker 52 by now, maybe even 55. But there it was again, identical, standing in the exact same spot on the shoulder. Same angle, same height, same chilling presence. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. Sweat began forming on my forehead despite the cool October air. I pressed harder on the gas pedal, accelerating to 70. The engine roared. The trees blurred past my windows. I focused on the road ahead, searching desperately for anything different. A side road, a driveway, a mailbox, anything to prove I was moving forward. Nothing changed, just trees and darkness and the suffocating sense that I was trapped in some horrible loop. And then, impossibly, I saw it a third time. Mile marker 47. This time I slammed on the brakes. The car screeched to a stop in the middle of the empty road. My breathing came fast and shallow. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my throat. I stared at that marker, and it stared back like some silent sentinel guarding a boundary I had accidentally crossed. I grabbed my phone with shaking hands. Still no signal. I tried to restart it. Nothing. I tried the radio again, twisting the dial frantically. Only that terrible silence answered me. That is when I noticed something else, something that made my blood turn to ice. The trees were not moving. There was no wind, no sound of leaves rustling or branches creaking. The forest around me was absolutely still, like a photograph. Like everything had frozen in place except for me and my car. I sat there in the middle of Route 219, alone, terrified, trying to understand what was happening. Every rational part of my brain insisted this was impossible. Roads do not loop. Mile markers do not repeat. Time does not stop. But I was living proof that all of those things were wrong. I put the car in reverse and backed up slowly, watching the mile marker disappear behind me. I drove backward for what felt like 10 minutes, then stopped and turned around. I would go back to Pittsburgh. Forget Ridgeway. Forget the delivery. I just needed to get out of this nightmare. I drove south. The same trees surrounded me. The same darkness pressed in from all sides. And after what could have been 5 minutes or 50, I saw it again ahead of me. Mile marker 47, waiting for me like it knew I would come back. I was trapped. The panic hit me then, real and raw and overwhelming. I screamed inside the car, hammering my fists against the steering wheel. The sound of my own voice was the only thing breaking that horrible silence. But screaming did not help. It only made the darkness feel heavier, more oppressive, like it was feeding on my fear. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to think clearly. There had to be an explanation. Maybe I was having a medical emergency. A stroke, a hallucination brought on by carbon monoxide poisoning. I opened the windows, letting the cold October air flood into the car. It smelled like pine and damp earth and something else. Something I could not identify. Something wrong. That is when I saw the figure standing beside mile marker 47. It had not been there before. I was certain of that. But now, illuminated in my headlights, there was someone standing perfectly still on the shoulder. A person, tall, thin, wearing what looked like dark clothing that blended into the shadows. I could not see a face, just the outline of a human shape watching my car. My first instinct was relief. Someone else was here, someone who might help me understand what was happening. But as I stared at that figure, relief turned to horror. Because it was not moving, not breathing, not showing any sign of life. It just stood there like a mannequin, facing the road, as motionless as the trees. I honked my horn. The sound seemed to die the moment it left my car, swallowed by the suffocating silence. The figure did not react. I considered getting out, walking over, asking for help, but every instinct in my body screamed not to leave the car. That thing standing by the mile marker was not a person. I knew it somehow, felt it in my bones. It was something else, something that belonged to this place, this horrible stretch of road where the normal rules did not apply. I hit the gas and sped past the figure without looking at it. My headlights swept across its form for just a second, and in that brief moment I saw something that has haunted me ever since. Where its face should have been, there was only darkness. Not shadow, not a mask, just an empty void that seemed to pull at my vision, trying to drag my eyes into it. I drove faster, 70, 80. The road blurred beneath me. I did not care anymore about mile markers or loops or making sense of anything. I just wanted out. And then, suddenly, everything changed. My phone buzzed in the cup holder. The screen lit up with notifications. Missed calls, text messages. My dashboard clock blinked back to life, showing 11:47 p.m. The radio crackled and a country song poured through the speakers, loud and jarring and beautifully normal. I saw lights ahead. Real lights. Street lights. The glow of a gas station sign. I had reached Ridgeway. I pulled into that gas station parking lot and sat there for 20 minutes, shaking, trying to process what had just happened. My phone said I had been driving for 3 hours and 47 minutes. But it felt like days, or minutes. Time had lost all meaning on that stretch of Route 219. I never made the delivery that night. I turned around and drove straight back to Pittsburgh on a different route, refusing to touch 219 again. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night. The thing that makes me question everything I thought I knew about the world. When I got home, I searched online for other people who had experienced something similar on that road. And I found them. Dozens of reports, all describing the same thing. The same mile marker, the same loss of signal, the same distortion of time, the same figure standing in the darkness. Every single person described mile marker 47. I have not driven through that part of Pennsylvania since. I take longer routes now. I avoid rural roads after dark, because I know the truth that most people refuse to accept. There are places in this country where something is deeply, terribly wrong. Places where reality thins out and something else bleeds through. Places that trap you in moments that should not exist. Route 219 is one of those places. And mile marker 47 is still there, waiting in the darkness for the next driver who does not know what they are about to find. The figure is still standing there too. I am certain of it. Standing perfectly still beside that marker, watching the road, patient and eternal. And sometimes, late at night when I cannot sleep, I wonder what would have happened if I had gotten out of the car. If I had walked over to that figure and looked into the void where its face should have been. Would I have found answers? Or would I have become something like it? Another shadow standing on the shoulder, waiting for the next person to pass by mile marker 47. I will never know, and I pray I never find out. Story 8. Drive out of Pennsylvania. Trapped in the nightmare loop. Have you ever noticed that once you cross into a place, you cannot escape it? That the harder you try to leave, the more trapped you become? That is what happened to my wife and me on a night that I still cannot fully explain. A night that has haunted us both for 3 years. We were driving through Pennsylvania on Interstate 76, heading from Philadelphia to Ohio. It was late, maybe 11 in the evening, and we had been on the road for hours. The highway was empty in that unsettling way that late-night stretches of interstate become, with nothing around but darkness and the occasional distant headlight. My wife Sarah was asleep in the passenger seat, her head against the window. I was alone with my thoughts and the hum of the engine, driving through what felt like the middle of nowhere. The landscape of Pennsylvania at night is bleak. Rolling hills covered in dense forest, shadows between the trees so dark they seemed solid. Gas stations appeared at random intervals, glowing like alien structures in the blackness. Truck stops with fluorescent lights that hurt your eyes. The road itself seemed to go on forever, mile after mile of asphalt stretching ahead, swallowing my headlights. Then I saw the sign. Exit 247. The words carved into green reflective metal. Below it, a smaller sign, Welcome to Ohio. State line ahead 2 miles. I felt relieved. We were almost out of Pennsylvania. Almost to Ohio where my sister was waiting for us. The darkness felt less heavy somehow, knowing we were close to crossing the state line, to leaving this eerie stretch of highway behind. But something was wrong, something that I could not quite identify at first. The mile markers. I had been watching them absently as I drove, the way you do on long drives to pass the time. Mile 247. That was what the green sign had said. But as I drove forward, watching for the next marker, I saw something that made no sense. The next sign read mile 247 again. Not 248, 247. I thought I had misread it. I must have. I kept driving. The highway curved through a thick section of forest. Trees pressed in on both sides, their branches reaching across the road like skeletal fingers. The darkness was absolute, broken only by my headlights cutting through the black. The road felt lonely, isolated, Terrifying in a way that is hard to describe unless you have driven through such a place at night. Then I saw another mile marker, mile 247. My heart began to beat faster. This was impossible. I should have passed mile 248, then 249, then the state line. But instead, I was seeing the same number again. I checked my odometer. It said I had driven exactly 7/10 of a mile since the last marker. I should have been miles past the state line by now. I should have been in Ohio. I told myself it was a mistake. The markers must be malfunctioning. The state must not have updated them properly. These things happen. I kept driving. Sarah was still asleep. I did not want to wake her. I would figure this out and we would laugh about it in the morning. A funny story about confusing road signs on a late night drive. But then the exit signs started appearing. Exit 247. Exit 247. Exit 247. Every few miles, another exit 247. I was seeing the same exit sign over and over again, as if I was driving in circles, as if the highway was looping back on itself. My hands gripped the steering wheel tighter. My palms were sweating. I was shaking, though I could not explain why. The landscape had not changed. It was still the same dense forest, the same rolling hills, the same eerie darkness. Nothing looked different. Nothing changed except for the terrifying repetition of these numbers that should not be repeating. I did not understand what was happening. I was driving straight. I had not turned around. I had not taken any exits. The highway should have carried me forward into Ohio. But instead, the signs insisted that I was still at mile 247, still at exit 247, still in Pennsylvania. I woke Sarah. I tried to keep my voice calm, but I could not hide the fear underneath it. I told her that something strange was happening with the road signs. They were not changing. We should have crossed into Ohio by now, but the sign said we were still at the same mile marker. I asked her if she was awake enough to look at the signs with me. Sarah was confused at first. She had been deeply asleep, pulled from dreams into the nightmare of my voice. But as she looked out at the road, as she saw what I was seeing, her confusion turned to fear. She said that made no sense. She said we must have taken a wrong turn. She said we should pull off at the next exit and figure out where we were. But there were no other exits, only exit 247, repeating endlessly. We drove for what felt like hours, watching the same mile marker, the same exit sign, the same landscape flash past our headlights again and again. The forest was unchanging. Not a single tree was different. Not a single building or structure broke the monotony. The highway curved in the same way, dipped in the same way, rose in the same way every few minutes. And then, something new. Something worse. The road signs started changing their messages. The first one was a simple warning. Fog ahead. Nothing unusual in that. Fog is common on highways in Pennsylvania at night. But we did not see any fog. The road ahead was clear, visible in our headlights for a quarter mile. The next sign said, slow down. Speed limit 55. The one after that, wildlife on roadway. But we saw nothing. No fog. No wildlife. No other cars. Just the same empty highway, repeating itself forever. Then the messages became stranger. One sign said, turn back now. I did not turn back. Another sign said, you cannot leave. I gripped the steering wheel so hard that my knuckles turned white. Sarah had gone silent. I could feel her fear filling the car, thick and suffocating. She was staring ahead, watching the road with an intensity that scared me. When I glanced at her, her face was pale. A new sign appeared. Look behind you. I did not look. I refused. I kept my eyes on the road ahead, though every instinct screamed at me to turn around, to see what was behind us in the darkness. Something was pursuing us. I could feel it, the way you feel someone watching you in a crowd. The weight of attention from something that did not mean us well. I pressed the accelerator. The car lurched forward, 80 miles per hour, 90. The darkness rushed past, the road signs flashing by in a blur. Exit 247, mile 247. Exit 247, mile 247. The repetition was driving me mad. Another sign. She sees it now. Sarah had let out a small whimper. She was pointing at something. At the roadside, in the darkness beside the highway, there was movement. Shapes. Things that were not quite deer, not quite human. Moving through the forest with a gait that was wrong. Unnatural. Their heads turned toward our car as we passed, eyes catching the reflection of our headlights in a way that eyes should not. Red, glowing, watching. The eerie landscape seemed alive now. Hostile. The darkness itself felt like a presence. Something aware and malevolent, pressing against the windows of the car. I kept driving. What else could I do? Turn around? Go back the way we came? We had been driving in circles for hours. Going back would just mean driving through this nightmare again. The scary signs kept coming. Some were warnings, danger ahead. Some were menacing, we know your name. We know where you live. Some were almost taunting, you will never leave Pennsylvania. The road became more treacherous. Cracks appeared in the asphalt, then holes. The surface became rough and uneven. I had to slow down to avoid damaging the car. As I slowed, the darkness seemed to press closer. The trees on either side of the highway seemed taller, their shadows deeper. The shadows moved independently of any light source, reaching across the road like tentacles. And then, at some point that I could not identify, the night began to change. The absolute blackness started to fade, not quickly, but gradually, imperceptibly at first. The darkness gave way to dark gray. Dark gray became lighter gray. The terrifying landscape of the night began to reveal itself in the weak light of dawn. The sun rose over the horizon, and suddenly, the horror began to become clear. The trees were not beautiful forest. They were dead, stripped of bark, branches skeletal and broken. The road surface was cracked and damaged, as if it had been neglected for years. And the mile markers, the exit signs, the road signs, all of them were old, rusted, faded. Some were hanging by a single bolt, about to fall. The sign that appeared as the sun climbed higher said, "Leaving Pennsylvania. Welcome to Ohio." We had done it. We had finally crossed the state line. But the relief did not come. Not then, not even now, because as we drove further into Ohio, as the dawn light revealed more of the landscape, I realized something horrifying. The forest we had been driving through all night, the one that had seemed so vast and endless, was not vast at all. It was a small section of trees, maybe a mile long. We had not been on a main highway. We had been on a small, deteriorating secondary road that looped back on itself. And the town we eventually found, a small place called Riverside, had a newspaper stand. Sarah bought a paper, needing something normal, something real. Her hands were shaking as she opened it. The date was from 3 days ago. We did not understand how that was possible. We had only been driving for a few hours. But the newspaper insisted that 3 days had passed. 3 full days of driving through the dark, watching mile 247, seeing those terrifying signs, watching the eerie landscape that had never once changed. I have never been able to explain what happened to us that night. I have looked up the road we were driving on. Exit 247 does not exist. Mile 247 is not a real location. The road we described does not match any highway in Pennsylvania. But I remember it. We both remember it. The fear is real. The lost time is real. Sarah refuses to drive through Pennsylvania now. Even if it adds 6 hours to a trip, she will not go back to that state. Sometimes, late at night, I catch her staring out the window, watching the darkness pass. And I know she is remembering that endless, horrifying drive. That moment when we realized that the landscape would never change. That we were trapped in a nightmare from which there was no escape until the sunrise finally came. But what I have never told her, what I have never told anyone until now, is this. I still see those mile markers in my dreams. I still see that sign that said you cannot leave. And sometimes, when I am driving on any highway at night, I see it again. Exit 247. Mile 247. Just for a moment. Just long enough to make my heart race. The signs are telling me that I never actually left Pennsylvania. That the past 3 years have been a dream. That when I finally go to sleep and do not wake up, I will be back on that terrifying highway, driving through darkness that has no end, chasing a state line that exists only to taunt me with the false promise of escape. And I am beginning to believe them. Story 9. Pennsylvania gas station call. Have you ever answered a phone call from a place you were standing in right that second? Have you ever felt the creeping realization that something in your world does not follow the rules you thought it did? That is what happened to me on a dark October evening on a lonely stretch of highway in Pennsylvania. And what I am about to tell you will make you question everything about how the world actually works. My name is David, and I need to tell someone what happened before I lose my mind completely. This is not fiction. This is not a story I made up for attention. This is what actually occurred, and I have spent the last 8 years trying to understand it. I was driving home from a work conference in Philadelphia. I had left the city around 6 in the evening, thinking I could make it to Cleveland by midnight. The highway stretched out in front of me, endless and gray, cutting through forests that seemed to grow denser as the sun dropped lower toward the horizon. My gas tank was reading a quarter full. and I knew I needed to stop soon. This was October in Pennsylvania, the kind of October where the leaves had already turned brown and were falling off the trees in clumps, making the landscape look sick and wrong somehow. I saw the gas station exit sign appear on the right side of the highway. It was the kind of sign that looked like it had been there for decades, the paint faded and the lettering barely visible. The name of the station was something generic, something I could not even fully read from the road. I took the exit without much thought. It was just a gas station. I had stopped at 1,000 gas stations in my life. This one did not seem different from any other as I pulled off the highway. But as I drove down the off-ramp and toward the station, something felt wrong. The first thing I noticed was that there were no other cars. Not a single vehicle in the lot. It was a Friday evening, around 7 o'clock, and this station should have had a few cars parked there. Instead, the lot was completely empty, stretching out like some kind of abandoned parking lot in a terrifying nightmare. The gas pumps stood in the darkness like silent sentries, and the small convenience store attached to the pumps had its lights on, but I could not see anyone moving around inside. I drove slowly up to the pumps and parked my car. The engine ticked as it cooled down. I sat there for a moment, my hands on the steering wheel, looking at the building. The door to the convenience store was dark glass, and I could see only faint shapes inside. Something about this place felt off in a way I could not quite explain. It was the kind of unsettling feeling you get when you walk into an empty room and you are sure that someone is watching you, even though you can see that you are alone. The air felt thick somehow, even inside my car. I grabbed my wallet and got out of my car. The cold hit me immediately, and I realized that it was colder here than it had been in the city. My breath came out in small clouds, and the sound of the wind moving through the dead leaves scattered around the parking lot was louder than I expected. The trees surrounding the station were all bare or nearly bare, creating dark shapes that seemed to lean toward the building. As I walked toward the convenience store door, I noticed something that made me pause. The door had a sign that said the store closed at 9, and it was currently 7:15. That was fine, but as I looked more carefully at the building, I realized that I could see no one inside. The store appeared to be completely empty. No cashier behind the counter. No other customers. Just empty shelves stretching back into the darkness. I should have gotten back in my car right then. I should have driven to the next exit. Some part of me, some instinct buried deep in my brain, was screaming at me that this place was not right. But I needed gas, and the pumps were right there. I could pump my own gas, pay at the pump with my credit card, and leave. Simple. Nothing to worry about. I tried to ignore the growing sense of dread that was building in my chest. I walked to the closest pump and pulled out my credit card. The pump was old, the kind that has a slot where you insert your card and then walk to get your gas cap off. I pushed my card into the slot, and the machine beeped once, accepting it. The screen came to life, asking me to select my grade of gas and the pump number. I pressed the button for regular unleaded and put the nozzle into my car. The gas started flowing, and I stood there in the cold October darkness, listening to the sound of fuel pouring into my tank. The station was so quiet that I could hear almost nothing except the gas pump and the wind. No cars on the highway. No sounds from the store. Just the endless darkness of the Pennsylvania night pressing in on me from all sides. That is when my phone rang. I pulled my phone from my pocket, looking at the screen to see who was calling. The number displayed was not a name I recognized. It was just a number. But as I looked at it more carefully, I felt all the blood drain from my face. The number was not just any number. The number matched the address of this gas station. The street address and the zip code were right there on my phone screen, and they matched the sign I could barely see from where I was standing. My hand was shaking as I stared at the phone screen. The phone kept ringing, vibrating against my palm. Every instinct I had was telling me not to answer it. Every rational thought in my head was saying that there was some mistake, some coincidence, some logical explanation. But I could not move. I could not do anything except stare at the phone as it rang and rang and rang. I answered the call. There was nothing on the other end. No breathing, no static, just a deep, terrible silence. The kind of silence that feels like it is actively listening to you. I waited for someone to speak, but no one did. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. And I was suddenly aware of how isolated I was, standing alone in a gas station parking lot in the middle of nowhere, holding a phone to my ear while someone or something on the other end said nothing. "Hello," I said. My voice sounded strange and small in the darkness. Still nothing. Just that terrible silence. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking so badly that I almost dropped it. The gas pump beeped behind me, indicating that my tank was full. I shoved the nozzle back into the pump and got back in my car without paying, closing the door and locking it behind me. I started the engine with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in the quiet night, and I pulled out of the gas station without waiting for anything else to happen. I drove fast, pushing my car up to 80 miles per hour on a highway that was completely empty in both directions. I looked in my rearview mirror, watching the lights of the gas station grow smaller and smaller behind me until they disappeared entirely into the darkness. My phone sat on the seat next to me, dark and silent, and I could not stop glancing at it, half expecting it to ring again. But it did not ring again. Not that night. I made it to Cleveland and drove straight to my apartment without stopping. I did not sleep that night. I sat in my living room with all the lights on, trying to understand what had happened. The most logical explanation was that someone at the gas station had called my phone using the station's phone line, and the caller ID had somehow displayed the station's address instead of their name or number. That made sense. That was rational. But it did not explain how they had gotten my phone number, or why they would call me from the station right when I was there, or why there was no one visible in the store. Over the next few days, I tried to research what had happened. I looked up the gas station on my phone, trying to find it on Google Maps and see if I could find any reviews or information about it. But I could not find it. There was no gas station at that address on Google Maps. I tried different search terms and different ways of spelling the name I barely remembered, but nothing came up. It was as if the station did not exist. The next week, I did something I still cannot fully explain. I got back in my car and drove back to Pennsylvania. I did not plan to. I told myself I was driving to see a friend, but the truth was that I needed to know if I had imagined the whole thing. I needed to go back to that station and see if it was real. It took me almost 4 hours of driving around those back roads, looking for the exit sign I remembered. When I finally found it, I almost drove past it, but there it was, the same faded sign, the same off-ramp leading down into darkness. I took the exit and drove slowly down the road toward where the station should have been. It was not there. There was nothing at that location except an old, rotting foundation and some broken concrete. Tall grass and weeds grew up through the cracked pavement. There was no sign of a gas station. No pumps. No convenience store. There was no building at all, just the ruins of what might have been standing there decades ago. I pulled up to the edge of the ruined foundation and turned off my engine. I sat there for a long time, staring at the ruins. The sun was setting again, and the shadows were growing long between the weeds. I started to feel that same sense of dread I had felt the first night, the feeling that something about this place was fundamentally wrong, that it existed in a state that my brain could not quite process. That is when I noticed something in the grass near the edge of the foundation. It was a gas station sign, old and rusted, partially buried in the dirt. I got out of my car and walked over to it, my hands shaking. The sign was from a gas station that had closed in 1984. 1984. I picked up my phone without thinking about what I was doing. There were no cell towers out here, or so I thought, but my phone showed full signal. I opened my contacts and looked at my recent calls. The call I had received at the gas station was still there, recorded in my phone. I stared at the number, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The call had lasted 42 minutes. 42 minutes. I had answered the phone and hung up after maybe 10 seconds. There was no way the call had lasted 42 minutes. But the record was right there on my screen, documented by the phone itself, proving that the call had lasted almost 3/4 of an hour. I looked at the time. It was now 7:50 at night. I had arrived at this location around 7 in the morning. 10 hours had passed in what felt like only an hour. I could not remember the middle of the day. I could not remember the drive from Cleveland to here. I could not remember anything except the moment I had hung up the phone and gotten back in my car. I have not been able to properly explain what happened to me on that October day. I have tried. I have spoken to doctors and psychologists. I have tried to tell people this story, but most of them think I am insane. They think I dreamed the whole thing or that I am suffering from some kind of mental illness. But I know what happened. I know that I drove to a gas station that did not exist, or rather, a gas station that has not existed for almost 40 years. I know that I received a phone call from that station while I was standing in its parking lot. I know that call lasted 42 minutes, even though I only held the phone to my ear for a few seconds. And I know that I lost 10 hours of my life between the moment I hung up the phone and the moment I realized what time it was. The most chilling part is this. I have never been able to find an explanation for any of it. But lately, I have been having dreams about that gas station. I dream about the pumps standing silent in the darkness. I dream about the convenience store with its empty shelves. And in the dreams, I am not alone. There is something else there with me. Something moving between the shadows. Something watching me while I pump my gas. I have also started noticing that my phone sometimes shows calls from places that do not exist. I will look at my call history and see numbers that correspond to addresses of abandoned buildings, empty lots, and forgotten structures scattered across the country. I do not remember answering these calls, but the phone says they lasted anywhere from 40 minutes to several hours. Yesterday, my phone rang. I did not look at the caller ID. I should have, but I answered it anyway, and there was that terrible silence again. That silence that feels like it is listening. This time, something was different. In the silence, I heard a voice, distant and echoing, as if it was coming from very far away. The voice was whispering something, speaking my name over and over, growing closer and closer until I could feel it right in my ear. That is when I hung up and started writing this account. I do not know what is happening to me. I do not know what I encountered at that gas station, or if it was even a real place. I do not know what I lost during those 10 missing hours. But I know this: something is out there, calling from places that do not exist, calling people who drive alone through the darkness on empty roads in forgotten parts of America. And I think it is trying to reach back through time to find me again. If you are driving alone late at night, and your phone rings with a number you do not recognize, I would strongly advise you not to answer it. Look at the caller ID first. Look at where the call is coming from. And if it is coming from a place that feels wrong to you, a place you have never been, an address of a building is abandoned or destroyed, then let it ring. Do not answer. Do not speak. Because once you have answered a call from a place that does not exist, that place will never stop trying to call you back. And each time you answer, you lose a little more time, a little more of yourself, until eventually, you realize that you are no longer sure where or when you are. The most horrifying thing about what happened to me is not the missing time or the impossible phone calls. It is the realization that I may not be the only one this is happening to. There may be hundreds or thousands of people out there right now, driving through empty nights on lonely highways, receiving calls from places that should not exist. And sometimes, on very quiet nights, when the world feels particularly dark and unsettling, I wonder if maybe those places do exist. Maybe they exist in some space between the real and the unreal, in the cracks of the world where impossible things happen. Maybe that gas station is still standing somewhere, even though no one can find it on a map. Maybe someone is standing at those pumps right now, getting ready to answer a phone call that will change everything. And maybe, just maybe, they are hearing my voice on the other end of the line, calling from the missing hours of my life, trying to warn them about what is coming. Story 10. Man on Pennsylvania Highway. I saw him on a Tuesday night in October, and I have spent every single day since trying to convince myself that what I witnessed was not real. But the truth is, I know exactly what I saw, and what haunts me most is knowing that I was not the first person to see him, and I certainly will not be the last. My name is Marcus, and I drive a truck for a living. I have been driving the same routes for almost 15 years, covering interstates across Pennsylvania, Ohio, and West Virginia. I know these roads like I know the back of my own hand. I know every curve, every dangerous intersection, every spot where the road gets slick in rain. I have driven these highways in blizzards and thunderstorms, in the dead of night and the bright heat of summer. I have seen things on these roads that most people never see. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened on Route 80 near Bloomsburg. It was around 11 at night when I first noticed something wrong. The highway was empty except for my truck. The kind of empty that feels unnatural somehow, like the world has been cleared out just for you. The darkness on both sides of the road was complete and total. No houses, no lights, just the endless black of the Pennsylvania forest pressing in from both sides. My headlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the yellow lines that divided the road, and nothing else. I had been driving for about 6 hours straight, and I was starting to feel the fatigue creeping in. My eyes were getting heavy, and I had turned up the radio to keep myself awake. Classic rock was playing, some song I had heard 1,000 times before. But then something caught my eye, something that made my entire body go rigid with a fear I could not quite explain. There was a man standing on the side of the road ahead of me. At first, I thought maybe it was just a sign or a shadow, something my tired brain was misinterpreting. But as I got closer, the shape became unmistakable. A human figure, a man, standing completely still on the shoulder of the highway, facing away from the road, staring out into the darkness of the forest. This was strange, very strange, It was past 11 at night on a desolate stretch of Pennsylvania highway. There was nothing out here. No towns, no gas stations, no houses, nothing but forest and road and darkness. What was a man doing standing out here alone in the middle of the night, just staring into the woods? My instinct was to slow down. The truck was doing about 60 miles per hour, and I eased off the accelerator, watching the man as I approached. I expected him to turn around, to acknowledge my truck, to flag me down or move away from the road. But he did not move, not even a little bit. He just stood there, motionless, his dark figure silhouetted against the black forest behind him. I was now about 30 yards away from him, close enough that I could see he was wearing dark clothes, a jacket of some kind. His posture was strange, not quite rigid, but not quite natural either. He was leaning forward slightly, his arms hanging at his sides. And he was absolutely, completely still. Something about this screamed danger to me. Every instinct I had was telling me that this was not right. That this man should not be here. That something was wrong with the way he was standing, the way he was facing away from me, the way he was not reacting to my truck. This approach. I should have kept driving. I should have slowed down enough to see if he needed help, and if anything felt wrong, I should have sped up and gotten away from there as fast as possible. But I did not. Instead, I slowed the truck down even more, almost crawling now. My headlights illuminated him more clearly. He was thin, very thin, wearing what looked like a dark blue jacket and black pants. His hair was dark. He was maybe 40 or 50 years old. His skin looked pale in the white glare of my headlights. And still, he did not move. He did not turn to look at me. He did not step back from the road. He just stood there, completely motionless. I was now only about 10 yards away. The cab of my truck was completely silent except for the low hum of the engine and the faint sound of the radio. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to do something, but I did not know what. I could not decide if I should keep going or if I should stop and ask if he needed help. I made a decision. I would slow down almost to a stop, take a good look at him, and if he did not respond or move, I would drive away and call the police. I hit the brakes. The truck slowed down to about 5 miles per hour. The man was now directly in front of my truck, maybe 15 feet away. I could see him clearly now. He was absolutely motionless. His face was pointed down, his chin on his chest. I could not see his face clearly, but I could see that his skin was very pale. His hands were hanging straight down at his sides, and they looked strange somehow, wrong in a way I could not quite articulate. I was waiting for him to do something, to move, to turn around, to acknowledge my presence in any way, but he did not. The seconds stretched on. I could feel the weight of his presence even though he was not moving. It was the most unsettling, eerie thing I had ever experienced. This complete, unnatural stillness. That is when I realized something that made the fear I was feeling turn into something much darker and more terrifying. The man was not breathing. I could see his chest clearly in the headlights, and there was no movement. No rise and fall of breathing. He was just standing there, motionless, not breathing, staring down at the ground. I pressed on the accelerator and drove away from him. I did not look in my mirror. I did not want to see if he was moving or if he was still standing there in that same unsettling pose. I just drove, my hands gripping the steering wheel tightly, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might come out of my chest. I drove for maybe 20 minutes before I finally calmed down enough to think clearly. I told myself that there was a logical explanation. Maybe the man was sick. Maybe he was having some kind of medical emergency. Maybe he was sleepwalking or high on drugs. There were explanations. There had to be explanations. What I had seen could be explained if I just thought about it logically. But the creeping dread I felt would not go away. When I got to the truck stop in Bloomsburg, I did something I usually never do. I went inside and ordered coffee from the waitress. I sat in a booth and tried to shake off the terrifying, chilling feeling that had settled over me. I kept thinking about that man, about the way he was not breathing, about the unnatural stillness of his body, about the pale, disturbing appearance of his skin. After about an hour, I decided I should call the police. I pulled out my phone and dialed the non-emergency line for the Pennsylvania State Police. I told them what I had seen. A man standing on Route 80 near Bloomsburg, around 11 at night, who appeared to be in distress. I gave them the best estimate I could of where he was standing. The officer who took my call seemed concerned, and he said they would send someone out to check on him. But when I checked the next morning, there was no news. No reports of anyone being found on that stretch of road. No missing persons report. Nothing. It was as if the man had never existed at all. I tried to put it out of my mind. I told myself that maybe he had just wandered off into the forest before the police arrived. Maybe he was a homeless person who spent his nights on that road. Maybe he had moved on to somewhere else. I tried to convince myself that what I had seen was not as scary or as strange as I had thought. But then I heard about the others. 2 weeks after I saw the man, I stopped at a diner near the highway, a place I often ate at. The waitress, a woman named Sarah who I had known for years, asked me if I had heard anything about the man on the highway. I asked her what she meant, and she told me that multiple drivers had reported seeing the same man standing on Route 80 in the exact same spot, always at night, always standing completely motionless. More than a dozen drivers had reported seeing him, always in the same location, always in the same pose, always standing and staring into the darkness of the forest. Some drivers said they had slowed down to ask if he needed help. Most said he never acknowledged them in any way. He never moved. He just stood there. The police had searched the area multiple times. They had sent out officers with flashlights and dogs. They had combed through the forest. They had set up surveillance cameras on the road. But they had found nothing. No trace of anyone ever being there. No footprints. No physical evidence of any kind. And the man had continued to appear on the road, night after night, always in the same location, always motionless. The story had gotten into the local news. There were reports of a mysterious figure haunting Route 80, a scary urban legend that had started to spread through the trucking community. Some drivers were avoiding that stretch of road altogether. Others were deliberately driving through it slowly, hoping to catch a glimpse of the haunting, eerie figure. I felt cold when I heard this. I had seen him. I had been there. I had experienced that disturbing, terrifying presence. And I was not the only one. This was real. Whatever this was, it was real, and it was happening. I did something foolish. I told myself that I needed to understand what was happening. I needed to drive back to that spot and see if I could catch another glimpse of him. Maybe if I saw him again, I could get better information. Maybe I could actually help. Maybe I could finally understand what that horrible nightmare sensation I had felt that first night actually meant. It took me almost a week to work up the courage to do it. But the following Tuesday, almost exactly 2 weeks after I had first seen him, I drove that stretch of Route 80 again. I deliberately slowed down as I approached the location where I had seen him. I was watching the side of the road carefully, my heart rate increasing as I got closer. And there he was, the same man, standing in the same spot, standing in the same impossible pose, motionless, not breathing, his head down, his arms hanging, his pale skin visible in my headlights. The sight of him filled me with a fear that was so intense and so overwhelming that I almost lost control of the truck. This time, I did not slow down. This time, I did not try to get a closer look. I pressed down on the accelerator and drove away from him as fast as the truck would go. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. My vision was swimming. I could feel bile rising in my throat. I drove all the way to the next truck stop, got out of the truck, and threw up behind the building. When I finally stopped being sick, I went inside and called in an anonymous tip to the police again, giving them the exact location where the man was standing. I have called that tip line 7 times since that night. 7 times. And each time, the police have searched the area and found nothing. Nothing at all. No sign of anyone ever being there. But he keeps appearing. I have talked to other drivers. There is now a whole community of truckers who are aware of the man on Route 80. Some have seen him multiple times. Some have seen him in different locations along that stretch of highway. Some say they have seen his number increasing, that there are now multiple figures standing on the road at night, all of them equally motionless, equally still, equally terrifying. The police have stopped responding to calls about him. They have called him an urban legend. They say that mass delusion is spreading through the trucking community, that people are seeing what they expect to see. But I know what I saw, and I know that I am not crazy. I have spent hours researching what this could be. I have read about supernatural entities that haunt highways. I have read about strange phenomena that occur on stretches of road where people have died in accidents. I have read about mass hallucinations and shared delusions, but nothing explains what I have witnessed. The most disturbing thing is what I realized after the 7th time I called the police. When I gave them the location of the man, I was more specific this time. I said he was standing exactly 57 feet from a certain mile marker. I gave them a very specific, measurable location. The next day, I did something I knew I should not do. I drove back to that location during the daytime. I found the mile marker I had referenced. I walked exactly 57 feet from that marker, measuring the distance carefully. There was nothing there. No trace of anyone standing there. No disturbed grass. No footprints. Nothing. Just the shoulder of the road, covered with dead leaves and gravel. But as I stood there, I felt something. A presence. Something watching me. Not behind me. Not in front of me. But all around me. Like the air itself was aware of me. Like the forest and the road and the darkness itself were paying attention to me. I got back in my truck and drove away from there. I have not been back since. What I have come to believe is this. The man on Route 80 is not a person. Or rather, he is not a person anymore. He is something else. Something that exists in the space between the real and the unreal. Something that can appear to multiple people but cannot be found. Something that is growing more numerous, more present, more frequent with each passing day. And the most horrifying realization I have had is this. Every time I see him, I understand less and less. Every time I see him, I feel more drawn to him, more curious about him. And I know, with absolute certainty, that eventually, I will be unable to resist the urge to stop. Eventually, I will pull over and get out of my truck and walk toward him. And when I do, something terrifying will happen. I can feel it coming. It is like a chilling, creeping sensation that grows stronger every day. The desire to understand, the need to know what he is standing there looking at in the darkness of that forest. The need to know what he wants. Last week, I did something I have never told anyone. I looked at a map of all the locations where the man has been seen. All the spots along Route 80 where drivers have reported him. And I realized something that makes my blood run cold every time I think about it. The locations form a pattern. They are not random. They are positioned in a way that creates a path through the forest. A path that leads to somewhere specific. A path that seems to be pointing deeper and deeper into the darkness. And the path is getting longer. New sightings are being reported at new locations. The man is moving. He is spreading. The sightings are moving further along the highway, creating a longer and longer path into the forest. I think he is trying to lead us somewhere. I think he is trying to guide us into the darkness. And I think that eventually, the path will be complete, and drivers will start to follow it, and they will never come back out. The most terrifying part of all of this is that I find myself wanting to follow him. Every time I drive that road, I feel the pull of it. The desire to understand, the need to know what he is looking at, the hunger to walk into that forest and find out what is waiting there in the shadow and the eerie darkness. I know this sounds insane. I know that people will think I am having some kind of mental breakdown. But I'm writing this as a warning. If you drive on Route 80 in Pennsylvania at night, and you see a man standing on the side of the road, do not stop. Do not slow down. Do not try to help him. Do not try to understand him. Just drive. Drive as fast as you can and never look back. Because he is not looking for someone to help him. He is looking for someone to follow him. And the longer you stay in that area, the harder it becomes to leave. I feel it happening to me right now. Every night, I find myself driving that route. Every night, I slow down a little more. Every night, I get a little closer to stopping. And every night, I see him more clearly. And every night, the disturbing, chilling realization grows stronger that he is waiting for me to finally understand. That he has always been waiting. That all of us who have seen him have always been meant to see him. And soon, very soon, I will stop the truck. I will get out. And I will walk toward him into the darkness. And then, maybe, I will finally understand. Pennsylvania is full of highways people drive every day. But after hearing these stories, you know some of them are not meant to be taken at night. Subscribe to Vesper Shroud for more true horror stories, because some places remember everyone who passes through.